Hey, everybody, welcome to the 2022 Omaha Film Festival. We are thrilled that you're here. We thank you very much for sitting through A Crack in the Mountain, a documentary that we absolutely loved. And we're thrilled to have Alastair Evans with us, the writer, director, producer of this amazing documentary. And what a task to put together this 2 hours worth of cinema. I can't even imagine like what all you went through to kind of get all the footage and all the interviews and stuff. So I'm looking forward to talking to you, Alastair. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, my pleasure, Mark. I wish we were here in person, but we're not, and it's just I'm just grateful to be able to at least have this opportunity to have a conversation about the film because yeah, I love talking about it, and looking forward to see if there's any audience response from it as well. We'll have to see.
Yeah. Hopefully, I'm sure that would be the case. There's so much in those 2 hours. There's so much to see and understand and learn. When I first saw, when it first got entered in the festival and we had a chance to look at it, you look at the marketing materials, the poster, and even like the trailer and whatnot, and you see A Crack in the Mountain. You kind of make an assumption, well, I know what this is about. It's going to be like a National Geographic movie about this huge cave and the light cutting through, and it's an obvious like A Crack in the Mountain title for what you're going to see. But then you watch the movie and you're like, oh wow, this title could mean a lot more. The crack in the mountain isn't necessarily just this big hole, but it's also talking about the geopolitical struggles in Vietnam, the social economics, and then the environmental stuff as well. So there's a lot of actual cracks that are happening in this movie that you're exposing people to.
I mean, the film went through quite a journey. I mean, when I originally conceived of the thing, it was just a 30-minute YouTube documentary about the cave, and then that was in 2017, and then it did kind of grow from there. And I wanted to, create more of a human story, telling the story of, say, the guest experience and the explorers experience and the activist experience, and then it sort of grew into like a 60-minute thing. And then I discovered the story of Phong Ya, which was, in my mind, the most compelling part of the narrative. And then it sort of grew out of that. And then from there came the issues which are, I really felt in that town and also throughout a lot of Vietnam, as you say, the social political struggles, et cetera. And these aren't necessarily things which people know about. I mean, a lot of people see Vietnam now as quite an attractive travel destination in Southeast Asia, but we hear about struggles in China and obviously Russia right now, but some of the issues which people go through in Vietnam aren't necessarily front and center. So I think it was, for me anyway, it was important to address some of those concerns, but also it was quite challenging because I had to do so in a way which meant that the people in the film weren't targeted or affected, particularly the activists. So there was sort of a delicate balance there to be had. And yeah, I'm still waiting to see whether I got the balance right.
We're going to talk a lot about the balance because that's one of the things that I'm most impressed by, what you were able to do. So we will for sure get into that, but let's go back to the beginning and like, how did you even hear about Song Doon to where you wanted to make this film?
So, I mean, I first heard about it when I was working on a defunct travel online magazine, and a researcher put this article across my desk: largest cave in the world. Interesting, not particularly interested in caves myself. I grew up in Derbyshire in the UK, which is quite famous for the caves. In actual fact, the cavers in the film laugh at me because they say, how on earth didn't you go to a cave when you were growing up, when you were living in Derbyshire? But, as with most people, caves are dark, dingy, wet, not the most attractive places. But when you see the photos of Song Dong, you realize that this is something entirely different. I mean, to call it a cave from a layman's perspective is almost a disservice, because it's so much more than that. It's a kingdom. It's an underground kingdom. It has its own ecosystem. It has, lakes and rivers and waterfalls and jungles in it. I mean, that's not traditionally what you would find or see in a cave. So when I saw the pictures, I was like, yeah, I've got to go. I mean, I love traveling. At the time I was working on this magazine, And I went there first in 2017, and yeah, I mean the pictures look stunning, but the experience is so singular and just so incredible that it really struck me here. No, not the camera. It really struck me here. So and for that reason, I don't know. I just decided that I wanted to make something of this, and then it kind of grew from there.
And the growth and where it ends up, it seems like a huge insurmountable thing. But what you talked about, having a small, like a YouTube thing, and then have it grow to this kind of thing, and then to eventually what it was, like doing it in those bite-sized chunks, it kind of makes more sense, and it helps inform me as to how you tackled such a massive thing. So yeah, that was probably a good way to approach that.
I mean, that obviously wasn't the intention. I mean, it took 5 years, and I think I probably could have got it down to 3 or 4 if I knew exactly what I was doing at the beginning. But first film shooting in extreme conditions, first film telling a large story with large themes. So I'm not sure it could have gone any other way.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like you said, that I think the results are speak for themselves, and just that process. I mean, it makes sense. You talked about, going there the first time yourself in 2017, which is, 3 years after the kind of the British group of people. Oh no, they went back in 2009. So, about 8 years later.
Well, it was 2014 when tourists were first allowed in. So 3 years after that.
Right. So you're pretty early on in the process. And I looked at in the credits, and you have a cinematographer for the documentary, but I think you're also listed as a cinematographer as well. So I assume a lot of this amazing footage was shot by you. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I shot 94.5% of the film. I had to calculate that because of licensing reasons. And then there's obviously sort of a percentage which is archive footage, etc. Ryan DeBoot shot just over 5 minutes of the film, and I licensed the footage from him, and generally speaking, for 5 minutes, you generally put that person in sort of in the midst of all the licensing stuff. But his footage is so important for the film that I really felt I've got to give him a top tier credit. I mean, he shot a lot of the drone footage in the cave. I have 2 drone shots of mine in the cave, which I'm quite proud of, because it's an absolute nightmare flying a drone in the cave without GPS in the dark as well. So Ryan's footage is key to the project.
Awesome. So to put on your producer hat for a minute, what was it like? I feel like the different subjects that you have, talking about the cave and talking about the community and the area around it and the country, I feel like each one of them had a kind of a singular voice with regard to the topic. They weren't all on the same page necessarily, but they all had something that was, I think, pretty important to say about the subject of your film. So what was it like going through and finding all the different people that you interviewed?
Well, I mean, casting in documentaries is so important. I mean, people don't really think about this, but it's one of the most important things. I mean, I interviewed dozens more people than what you actually see on camera, and at this time a lot of those people don't actually know they're not in the film, but it's already 115 minutes, so I'm sure no one wants to watch a 3-hour documentary about caving and social geopolitics in Vietnam. So yeah, I mean, I spoke with a lot of people and asked for recommendations about who I should interview. Adam Spillane, who's featured in the film, was also a fixer, quite frankly, and putting me in touch with guests. I mean, he takes a lot of people in, and he maintains connections with them. And he just gave me a list of his top people, which was an absolute godsend. And then I spoke with them on the phone, filtered them down into those who I felt had the most interesting stories and narratives, and then went to visit them mostly in the USA. But when it comes to the locals, I mean, it was really a question of just speaking to those prominent voices. I mean, you hear David English in the film, you hear High in the film as well. I mean, these are sort of the more eloquent vocal voices, the more eloquent voices in Phong Ya So it was relatively easy to find them because it's quite a small community.
Yeah, I think you mentioned her name, the Save Song Doon gal, Hoang Nguyen. Is that her name?
Mm. Well, Mark, she laughs at me for pronouncing her name wrong all the time. I say Fung, which is about 70% right. There's some sort of guttural thing you need to do. I can't do it, so yeah, I say Fung.
I'm not going to give it a shot then, but we know who we're talking about. She was. I loved her perspective throughout. She has kind of a like, this is my opinion about the situation, but she can kind of also not kind of, she can absolutely understand the other side of it. So I thought she was a real compelling figure and a real a great spokesperson for the story that you were kind of telling. Like, talk to me about how you found her and her part of the movie.
Well, I mean, I found her through a TED Talk, which is briefly in the film, and I'd really encourage everyone to go and watch the entire thing. I mean, it's about, I haven't watched it in a couple of years. I think it's about 15 minutes long, and it's very compelling. And at the time, I wasn't. This is. I think I saw it in August 2018. I think it was summer 2018. And at the time, I wasn't actually that interested in the cable car narrative. I don't know why. I can't place myself in that mindset anymore. I don't know why I would have thought not to include it, because I knew it was part of the narrative, but for some reason I didn't want to touch it. Don't ask me why. That was my old self. Anyway, I saw her TED Talk, and it was extremely compelling. And it was very. I mean, to talk about casting, it's very obvious to me that she needed to be in the film. So I contacted her, and then a month later, I was in Ho Chi Minh shooting her.
Yeah, she had just such a great narrative and such a good through line. She was in multiple spots throughout the film, and yeah, a great. So that's, I guess, that's kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about. With all the characters, and with you've shown, here's a place, here's a situation in this country. There are very different vehement sides on both sides of, I think the world should have a chance to see this, like the Grand Canyon. Like, the world should be able to see this amazing place, but then there's the exploitative side of it that we have to really protect, because we're humans, and we know that we'll ruin something the second you get a chance. So to be able to strike that balance, which you mentioned earlier, I think you did a masterful job of each one of the people that talked about it, I feel like, said, here's this amazing thing that needs to be protected. On the other hand, like, the people in Vietnam are struggling, especially kind of close by there. Boy, we could really infuse a ton of capital. We could really change these people's lives, this current generation as well as their generation after that, if we did something, if we put kind of a Disneyland in their backyard to help them out. So yeah, I mean, I guess, so talk a little bit more about walking in that line and trying to see and understand both sides of that.
Well, I mean, that was probably the most challenging part of the whole experience. I mean, shooting was difficult in the cave, but didn't compare to trying to convey the complexity and the nuance of what was going on in a way which didn't dumb down or distill it. That was the most challenging part of the process. I mean, it would be very easy to make what I describe as an environmental polemic, which just says, protect. But I think there's a validity to those films. But for me, I find the tension between the sustainability angle, but also the needs of the people, quite compelling. So I was really trying to convey that. I mean, this is not a film about climate change. I mean, some people have mentioned it is. I don't think it is. That certainly was never my intention. But when I finished the film and I sat down in my living room as opposed to my editing studio and watched it with a glass of wine as a normal person, I can see that there is a way to read it, in the sense that it is a metaphor for what we do to our planet. That Songdong is, a place which we should protect, but at the same time, greed trumps all, arguably. So there is sort of a potential metaphor you can draw between how we treat Songdong and how we treat, the globe itself, but also that there's no easy decisions or choices here. I mean, a complex, difficult subject. To think otherwise is naive. So I was just trying to really convey that. And one thing which is interesting, which again I didn't necessarily notice until I watched it back myself, that in terms of how people feel Songdong will be moving forward, there does seem to be a difference of opinion based on age. So if you look at the older voices in the film, those who are a bit more long in the tooth and have seen how things go, and have seen how history often repeats, there is a certain realism and also a certain pessimism about what's going to happen, whereas the younger voices are a bit more optimistic. So I think, again, that's quite an interesting tension between the generations.
Yeah, it's a real mature look from a filmmaker's perspective who doesn't live there. You're not from there necessarily, and so for an outsider, which you'd have to cast yourself as, to look into that situation, it's a real mature way to approach their situation. And yeah, like you said, it would have been easy to just say this is what the film is and this is what it's about, but to hear those different voices and talk about that, stepping in, like you were able to get a lot of that original British expedition, like those folks. What was it like talking to those guys? And I'm sure you heard tons of a story. Like you said, you can't make a 20-hour documentary, but I'm sure you have enough footage for that. Like, what were some of the stories like hearing from those guys?
Oh wow! I mean, cavers certainly like to enjoy themselves. Put it like that. I mean, people have asked me whether I'm interested in caving in the future, and I always say, well, I'll go to the after party, because the cave itself caving itself for me is still not really a sport I would sort of pursue, but certainly those guys know how to party. Put it like that. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm not sure if there's any stories I can tell which are clean, to be honest. But certainly, I mean, there's a moment in the film, right early on. This is probably not the best story, but one which is featured briefly. Adam at the beginning talks about having on the original exploration, I should say, coming back from Songdong to Hangem, where they were camping, and having to walk through the jungle in the dark. I mean, he described that in more detail. It was quite a hairy experience, because I mean, going through the jungle itself is quite challenging at the best of times, but going through the jungle in the dark when you've got snakes floating down the river, that was an anecdote which I'm sure he doesn't want to relive. But yeah, the cavers probably can tell better stories than I can, put it like that.
Yeah. All that is horrifying. The one shot, like I'm a little bit of a claustrophobic guy, and I'm not a heights guy either. And to see people like trying to climb through, to get from one point to another, like stuff like that, absolutely freaks me out. So my caving would be sitting in my living room watching it on television, and that's about as close as I want to get to it. So I mean,
it's funny. No one has ever reported feeling claustrophobic in Songdong. I mean, probably for obvious reasons, because I mean, if you go through a tight squeeze, the boulders are the size of houses, so it doesn't necessarily. And also, of course, the ceiling is 300 meters high or whatever. So it's not really. There's no point in Songdong which you would feel claustrophobic. I mean, it is much more glamping than camping, I would say. I mean, it's quite a comfortable experience. The cave is very temperate. It's occasionally it gets a little bit cold, but not so much. You're well cared for by the porter team. I mean, it's challenging to some degree, but I've been in there with older folks, people with bad knees, etc., and everyone I've met has got through. Someone had to be pulled up on the rope at the end, which was quite amusing, and I've got that on camera. Screaming and kicking because he just couldn't take it anymore. Sam. But yeah, apart from that, I mean, people managed to get through quite easily.
Awesome. What was it like? Kind of the local guys. They feel like they're their own characters, like they're their own like the Oompa Loompas or something in that story, but they have I think they have a real sense of like, we're going to take care of whatever people come our way, like we're really going to take care of them. What was it like kind of interacting with that group of people?
I mean, that was one of the privileges of the experience. I mean, I really enjoyed interacting with the locals. I mean, they came in all sorts of forms. I mean, first off, I had assistants who would help me carry my bags and set up tripods and sort shots for me, etc., etc. They were all English speaking, so I could communicate with them quite easily. I mean, they were absolutely wonderful. The film wouldn't have been what it is without them. And then, of course, you have the porters themselves who speak little to no English. And I spent quite a lot of time with them just on a one-to-one basis, or me in a group, not really being able to communicate. But they are. I mean, I grew up in a small town, so I understand small town mentalities, and there's always a kindness and an empathy and a warmth to people who live in close knit communities. I mean, Fongyar is very, very small. I mean, it's almost incestuous in the way it's constructed, because everyone's marrying their sisters and brothers, etc., etc. But it does mean that the village really does raise itself up together. I mean, it's quite a special place being there. I mean, there is a scene in the film where I shoot a whole bunch of locals talking inside about how the town will evolve and develop in the future. And I spent a lot of time just sitting in the backs of houses, just pointing my camera at groups of people and shooting, not having any idea what they were saying, and just sort of guessing who was saying the most compelling thing, and then sending the transcript off to someone. And 3 months later or 2 months later, it took forever for them to transcribe these conversations, which are the talking over the top of each other. I'd eventually find out what they were saying. So that was quite an interesting experience. I mean, yeah, the being in Fongyar and spending the time with the people there was an immense privilege.
Yeah, talk to me about those like red shoes. Like when I think about hiking or mountain climbing or whatever, like I feel like we're gonna have some expensive boots, and not like my feet are gonna be well cared for. But it seemed like everybody, like after seeing the little highlight that you did of those kind of red strappy shoes, I paid attention, and everybody that was there was wearing those shoes. So like, what's the origin of those?
So I mean, those are, I can't remember the exact price. I think they're somewhere between 50 cents and $2 to buy. So that they're very, very cheap. And they look quite flimsy to your eyes. They look like the sort of things you'd never ever want to wear in an extreme environment like the cave. I haven't worn them. All the porters do, and they absolutely swear by them. Absolutely swear by them. That they're the most sturdy, surefire way of jumping from rock to rock. They never ever slip. I'm slipping and sliding all over the place in my $250 caving shoes, which were completely rubbish, and they're sort of balancing on one leg as they jump over this crevasse in these little shoes. So yeah, I mean, it's reached the point now where actually the British cavers have started to wear them because they're just frankly better.
Yeah. Did you, so you talked about like the group of porters and the local guys like kind of taking care of you. Did you feel like you were welcome? Like, did you feel like they embraced you and you like the purpose for you being there?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they're very. Firstly, I mean, I suppose I was a guest on a tour. For the most part, certainly in the beginning, that's what I was, and yeah, I was extremely well cared for. I mean, there's two things which people say when they go on a tour in Songdong, and having been on quite a couple, I'm able to compare. The food is excellent, and the porters are first class. I mean, that they really do take care of you. I mean, after I sort of turned up for the fourth or fifth time, and they started to go, "Hey, I've seen you before," the relationship changed to some degree. I mean, they became. It was less of a case of guest and porter, and it became sort of a closer relationship. I mean, I would be getting up at 4 a.m. when everyone else was sleeping and filming the guys preparing breakfast. And again, that's such a privilege doing that, standing there with the camera with this single guy cutting up carrots or whatever, and it's just me and him who are awake, and he's completely comfortable with me pointing the camera direct in his face, very, very close. And it's that intimacy which is one of my favorite parts of the process.
Yeah. So to take us back out of the cave for a minute, one of the things, so all the opening shots and all the, a lot of things are from inside, kind of looking at the expanse of this cave, and then you hear that it wasn't discovered until 2009, which just seems like, how does that even possible? Here's this massive thing that I'm looking at. How does someone not notice that? So I think you guys did a great job of then pulling back, and it was partially into the documentary where you're like, well, here's the mountains and here's the surrounding. You can't see any of this from the sky or from satellites or from, and it's a day and a half walk from like the nearest place where human beings are. So this magical, massive thing, you could really, I'm glad you showed it the way you did, because I think everybody that watches this would go, how did people not find this until very recently? So great job on that. I mean, what was your?
There's actually an interesting story about that. I mean, the Hokan was the first person to find the entrance in 1990, as the story goes, and the British cavers were the first people in there in 2000 and 2009. But interestingly, and it's not in the film because only got 2 hours. In Doe Line 1, which is the primary Doe Line, the primary sinkhole which is featured, there's actually shrapnel from a bomb, and so what that presumably means is that during the Vietnam War, an American plane was flying over, saw this opening, concluded that potentially that was a place where people might be hiding, and dropped a bomb down there. So that aviator was probably the first person to actually see Song Dong. I did spend a brief period of time seeing if I could dig up who this individual was, but of course it didn't go anywhere. But yeah, I mean, it's as Bill Stone says in the film, there are places. Caving is really one of the last frontiers. I mean, there is, again, not in the film, but there is a hypothesis that potentially there is a bigger cave than Song Dong quite close to it. There's a few leads within Song Dong which hint that there's potentially another opening. In fact, an equivalent of Hokan, another Vietnamese who was out in the jungle, reported a couple of years ago, or reported from a couple of years back, finding another small little crack with a lot of steam coming out of it, but he hasn't been able to find it again. So, potentially there is something bigger or as big as Song Dong close by.
All right, get Alastair and his camera out there. Let's just find this thing, right? One of the things that was interesting to me is, we're in America, and there's activism on every street corner for every topic, and it's interesting for me looking at other countries and seeing, the government and the geopolitical climate is rougher on regular, day-to-day citizens in some places more than others. Certainly Vietnam is on that list. So there's people that are trying to be activists, and you even said at the top of this little chat that you wanted to protect the people that you interviewed for this show for any type of backlash or whatever. So talk to me a little bit about talking to people and sort of that cautiousness that maybe people had in discussing topics of activism nature.
I mean, when it came to Hung and her compatriots in Safe Song Dong, I mean, there really wasn't any reticence at all. I mean, she was very happy to talk about a lot of subjects, and a lot of the stuff I chose to cut because I just didn't feel that I wanted to put her in a position in the film. I don't know how big this film's going to be. Maybe no one will see it. I've got no idea. But should people, an audience en masse, see it, and then the Vietnamese government was to see it, then potentially there could be reprisals. So I had to make some quite serious decisions about what was to be included and what's not. And there's quite an important part in the film which I was very keen to get in, where she talks very, very clearly about how this is not a political campaign. This is an environmental campaign, and that moment is almost a a wild card, if you will, because it just needed to be said in very, very clear terms what they were looking to achieve. Normal people were a lot more reticent to talk about politics. You obviously have Zhang, who is the other activist, and I asked him when I sat down with him, look, how far do we want to go with this? Is there anything you don't want me to ask? And he said, let's just, and I said, I don't really know where the line is. And he said, well, that's the problem. I don't know where the line is either. So let's find it. So I felt a bit more encouraged, including he's the one who addresses the land rights issues, and he was happy to talk about that. And I felt more comfortable allowing him to give voice to that. But coming back to the locals, very, very reticent to talk about politics. I've even got someone who signed a release for me, signed the release, and then scrawled all over it in Vietnamese. As long as nothing political, is contained within, the parts which I'm featured in, etc., etc. So, people are very, very aware in Vietnam that that there can be consequences for things which they say.
Yeah, very astute on your part, and it's cool that you're protecting your subjects. And a lot of people are like, well, I'm gonna tell the story, and it doesn't matter. And so it's cool that you're respectful of every aspect of it. I just hope I got it right, Mark, because as I said, it's still very much up in the air what the Vietnamese government are going to say about all of this. So let's just hope that I managed to find the balance right. Yeah, agreed. So ultimately, to wrap this up, what's your goal? Like, you made a film, you want people to see this part of the world, you want people to understand, what people locally are going through and whatnot, and then all the things that we talked about. So what's your goal when people see this film, like at our festival and going forward, and like you said, as hopefully gets a larger audience? What do you hope will happen?
I mean, I'd like people to think about how we treat places of natural beauty, that they have a reverence to them which should be respected, and they're not some sort of cash cow which can be milked until it's bone dry and then discarded. That for me is quite important, because these are our treasures on this planet, and desecration is a strong word, but it's something which we so often do to these places. And I would just like people to consider their actions and consider the choices they make when they visit these places, and there should be a respect and a respect for them. Secondly, I'd love people to go and visit Phong Nha. It's a beautiful part of the world. It really is. It's still in a state of innocence, and I would think that international travelers, if they were to go there and say, hey, look, we don't want the high-rise buildings, we want an authentic experience. Yeah, we want a degree of luxury, and that can absolutely be catered for by, say, an eco lodge or whatever. But we don't need this to be turned into a Disneyland. If people were to say that, then the locals would be very receptive and responsive to that. I mean, you saw in the film that Phong Nha was destroyed by COVID. That was filmed in February 2021, and it got a lot worse since then, a lot worse. So it really is on its knees. And it's that thing about right now, filmmakers are trying to decide whether they make a COVID film. And I thought about that, but really there was no way I couldn't include that piece in the narrative, because it really has been a seminal moment in Phong Nha's history. And it really has just completely collapsed the town into nothingness. It's brought it to a pre-2010 state. So, but they are resilient people, and they are on the rise again. And I just encourage everyone who wants to visit a beautiful place, go visit Phong Nha, because it is an extraordinary, beautiful paradise.
Absolutely. All right, Alastair, thank you very much. acrackinthemountain.com if you want more information. Obviously, we're going to be streaming it from March 13th or April 2nd. I recommend this movie to as many people that want to see it. We would love to have you come out, and thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you, Mark. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome.